Have you ever prayed desperately for something only to have it go in the worst possible direction? To have things just absolutely fall apart on you and for it to be a tragedy, not a joy?
That's amazing. That was awesome, dude. Oh!
There are pastors out there and there is a theology out there, prosperity pastors like Robert Morris.
He reached in his pocket and he pulled out a check that was 10 times the amount.
And Stephen Furtick and the like would have you believe that if you behave, which is just code for following them, giving to their church, coming to their church, giving them praise and adoration, if you do all the right things when you pray, God will give you what you want. And if God's not giving you what you want, then you're not doing enough to praise and give to my ministry and my church. It's a horrifyingly evil and simplistic theology, and it is not scripturally based. It is the exact opposite of what Christianity ought to be. And the book of Daniel, believe it or not, has something to say about that. That's what we're talking about this week. Hello all, I'm the Mad Pastor, and Christianity sucks. It's boring, it's out of date, it's irrelevant, and these days it's predatory. But it doesn't have to be. Let me explain why. A quick reminder that we are raising money for Residing Hope, formerly known as the United Methodist Children's Home. They focus on a lot of things, but primarily what they do is foster care. And they are currently raising money for their back-to-school drive. Every cent that you give to this channel via the Venmo or the links in the description down below will go directly to that cause. And we're funded by an investment fund, so none of it goes to my salary or anything like that. It goes directly to helping children. Consider giving and give generously, please. So we are in the book of Daniel. This will be Daniel chapter 2. Each of the first chapters, the first 6 chapters or so, are self-contained stories, and then the second half of the book is really, it should be a different book. It's an apocalyptic, prophetic kind of, its writing style is very different. So we're just going to kind of focus on the first 6 chapters for this series, and it focuses on the main character, Daniel. The things you need to understand: it was written in about the 3rd century BCE, and it was during an oppressive state when Assyria had conquered Jerusalem and all of Israel. And so the Israelite people were being oppressed by the Assyrians. How does Daniel offer hope? Well, the writer of Daniel goes back 300 years earlier. So it's set in about the 6th century BCE. And it's during the time of Babylonian exile and conquer. So the Babylons have conquered Jerusalem and all of Israel, and they've exiled Hebrew people out of Jerusalem into the city of Babylon. And our main character, Daniel, is of Jewish royalty and nobility, and he and his friends are in the king's court because he's asked for the best of the Hebrew people to come and serve him as part of his enchanters and magicians and Chaldeans who prophesy and interpret dreams. This is kind of the ancient version of the CIA. This was how the ancient world gained insight into the future and the goings-on of foreign affairs. You know, they had more traditional methods, but interpreting dreams was like a big deal. And Daniel and his friends have become part of that king's court of dream interpreters. And so the king in the 2nd chapter, as we'll read, is going to have a dream and is going to expect an interpretation. Now, it's a long text. The 2nd chapter, even though it's a self-contained story, it goes on for a pretty long time. So I'm actually going to break this up a little bit, and I'm going to skip over some parts and summarize what's going on. So, you know, if you don't want to hear me read the text, by all means, use the navigations below to skip ahead, and you can go read it for yourself at your own pace. But for those of you who are hardcore like me, let's read the Bible. I am reading from the book of Daniel, chapter 2, verses 1 through 16 to start, and they sound like this. In the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed such dreams that his spirit was troubled and his sleep left him. So the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had such a dream that my spirit is troubled by the desire to understand it. The Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will reveal the interpretation." The king answered the Chaldeans, "This is a public decree. If you do not tell me both the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your house shall be laid in ruins. But if you do tell me the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore tell me the dream and its interpretation." They answered a second time, "Let the king first tell his servants the dream, then we can give its interpretation." The king answered, "I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time because you see the decree from me is firm. If you do not tell me the dream, there is but one verdict for you. You have agreed to speak lying and misleading words to me until things take a turn. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation." The Chaldeans answered the king, "There is no one on earth who can reveal what the king demands. In fact, no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king is asking is too difficult, and no one can reveal it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with mortals." Because of this, the king flew into a violent rage and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. The decree was issued, and the wise men were about to be executed, and they looked for Daniel and his companions to execute them. Then Daniel responded with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the king's chief executioner, who had gone out to execute the wise men of Babylon. He asked Arioch, the royal official, "Why is the decree of the king so urgent?" Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. So Daniel went in and requested that the king give him time, and he would tell the king the interpretation. So let's just summarize real quick what's going on. So the king calls in all of his enchanters to interpret this wild dream that he's had. But the normal process that a king would do is the king would tell his dream to the interpreters, and then the interpreters would offer an interpretation that was hopefully divinely inspired, or at least enchanted or magical in some way. And that's how they would know the future. And that's how the ancient kings would be able to decide what is best for ruling his people. Now, this is different because the king says, no. I don't trust your interpretation unless you can tell me what my dream was. I'm not going to tell you the dream. You tell me the dream. Then I'll know you have the ability to interpret it accurately. And of course, all the enchanters and the magicians are like, well, we can't do that. That's impossible. We don't know what you dreamed. You have to tell us the dream. And he's like, if you don't do it, I'm going to kill all of you. And so then the king goes out to kill them all because he doesn't trust them, because they are unwilling and unable to tell him his dream. And that means that our heroes, our boys, Daniel and his companions, they're part of that group of people. So they're going to be executed. But Daniel, who is our hero, he talks to the executioner and he says, whoa, what's going on? Executioner Arioch explains everything. And then Daniel says, hold on, just give me a minute. I can do it. And then this is the part we're going to skip a little bit. Daniel then tells everyone to pray and fast and ask for God to give the dream and the interpretation to Daniel. And lo and behold, it works. Daniel is confident now that he can go into the king and at the risk of his life, be able to confidently tell the king his dream and interpret it. So we're going to pick up again. Again, if you don't want to hear me read any more scriptures, skip ahead. Daniel chapter 2, verses 25 through 30 sound like this. Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said to him, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who can tell the king the interpretation. The king said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to tell me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered the king, no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or diviners can show the king the mystery that the king is asking. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has disclosed to King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen at the end of days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed were these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed, came thoughts of what would be hereafter, and the revealer of mysteries disclosed to you what is to be. But as for me, the mystery has not been revealed to me because of any wisdom that I have more than any other living being, but in order that the interpretation may be known to the king and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. So Daniel effectively comes in and says, your dream was important. You're seeing visions of what's going to happen to the end of days, the end of the kingdom of Babylon. You're seeing what's going to happen in the future. And then he goes on to give credit to God. He says, it's not because I'm so wise. It's because there's a God in heaven who is with me, who's revealing to you and to me the mysteries of the future. And so Daniel is giving testimony to the Hebrew God, to Yahweh, the God that we worship, the Judeo-Christian God. And then Daniel goes on to successfully interpret his dream. I'm not going to read the whole dream thing because basically it's a statue with multiple parts, and all the different materials that it's made of represent different kingdoms. And Daniel goes on to predict the future. And then Nebuchadnezzar at the very, very end reveals that Daniel got the dream right and can trust the interpretation, and then he ends it like this. Daniel chapter 2, verses 46 through 49. The king Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, worshipped Daniel, and commanded that a grain offering and increase be offered to him. The king said to Daniel, truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king promoted Daniel, gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court. So things worked out. So what are we to make of this? Well, a very simplistic interpretation that I think a lot of prosperity gospel preachers would say is, see, Daniel was faithful, God came through, they prayed, they fasted, and Daniel got what he wanted. What a good boy was he. What you should do is you should pray, you should fast, you should tithe to my church, you should give to our donations, and make yourself a good person, and you too can be like Daniel. You can get what you want. Ask God for what you want, and if you're good, he'll give it to you. There you go. There's an interpretation of it. Yeah. I think there's something more going on here, and in order to understand that, we have to understand the real historical context that's happening here. So let's take a look at the cultural and spiritual beliefs of the tabernacle and the temple, the Holy of Holies. So the temple is a building that was located in Jerusalem, and it was famously destroyed the first time by Babylon. So the temple has been destroyed. What is the temple? It's the center of spiritual and cultural life if you are an Israelite, and especially if you live in Jerusalem. It has the tabernacle and the Holy of Holies. It has the Ark of the Covenant and the law that was the covenant that was signed into agreement by Moses. It is the place where humanity can be in the presence of the divine. It's where God lives. Babylon destroyed the temple. That was part of the military campaign. They destroyed where God lives. And so it begs the question for Daniel and all the people who have been exiled and conquered by Babylon. Is God still with us? This horrible, awful, just absolute tragic thing has taken place, and God didn't do anything to stop it. Is God possibly in this act? And of course, many of the voices of the prophets say exactly that the Babylonians were allowed to come in because God allows it, because God is in that act. And the question now becomes, why? Well, very similar to the prosperity gospel. This is why it's dangerous. It's kind of a half-truth. The dynamic that the prophets set up and the understanding of why Babylon conquers Jerusalem is that they were not obeying the law, but specifically the parts of the law that are about taking care of orphans, widows, foreigners, treating people who have less the way that God has treated you, with grace and mercy and generosity. It's funny because the prosperity gospel preachers tend to take this message and say, your generosity means tithe to my church, even though you're worth $117 million, Robert Morris. Keep giving to my church. How much are you worth? I bet there's no one listening to this podcast or this channel who has $117 million net worth. I bet there's no one even close to that. What I'm asking for when I ask for donations is to help children, to help literal orphans. What he's asking for is to help pay his $1 million salary. There's a wild difference between doing what God has asked us to do and receiving blessings as a result of it, and Robert Morris and Stephen Furtick and the like saying, continue to make me rich. And that's what God wants you to do, and then God will make you rich. You hear the difference? I hope I'm articulating it well enough, because there's a wild difference. And the good news of the book of Daniel is the question, has God abandoned us? We've been exiled. Is God in this? Can God be at work in Babylon just like God was at work in Jerusalem? And Daniel comes to find out that God is literally at work in the minds and the dreams and the hearts of the Babylonian leadership, and especially that of the king. And that Daniel, through his faithfulness, is being elevated to offer interpretation and guidance and to help the people of Babylon, his enemies. It's a wild turn on its head, and it would have been the last thing that the readers of the story would have expected. But here we are. God is at work even in Babylon, even in the destruction of the temple, even in the exile of the Israelite people. God is at work. So how do we cooperate with God at work even amongst our enemies? That's the question we need to be asking ourselves. Where are the places you least expect God to be at work? Who are the people you least expect God to be at work in? That's where God's at work, and how do we cooperate with that? Maybe it's reconciling with a neighbor or a family member. Maybe it's giving. $250 will buy a foster kid a bed. $100 will buy them a bunch of school supplies. $5 will make a difference. Maybe God is calling you to be generous by not making millionaire preachers richer, but by actually helping the orphans that are literally in our community here in Orlando. If you give to us, none of it goes to me. I get paid by something else. Everything you give goes directly to helping people who have less than you. So consider cooperating with God however God's calling you. And if you can't think of anything, give some money to my church, and that money will go to help orphans. I've been the Mad Pastor. This has been Daniel chapter 2. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.